My mom had me to replace my dead brother and forced me to live his exact life. When I asked to be myself, she said, "We made you to be him. That's your purpose. Now I'm finally free." I was born to be someone else. My parents had my brother Marcus first. He died in a car accident when he was 15. They were devastated beyond repair. Their perfect son, their golden child, their entire world was gone. When this happened, my parents decided to have a replacement child. Basically, they'd have another child, me, who would become exactly like Marcus in every possible way. I found out that I was only born to replace my dead brother when I was 7. Before that, I just thought all kids wore their dead siblings' clothes and played with their toys. I didn't know any different. My earliest memory is sitting in Marcus's bedroom. I must have been about 3. I remember crying because the clothes were too big for me. The sleeves hung past my hands and the pants dragged on the floor. But my mom insisted I wear them anyway. She said Marcus would have wanted me to have his things. As soon as I started talking, she would correct me if I didn't sound like him. She made me watch home videos of Marcus speaking so I could copy his voice patterns and mannerisms. That was pretty much how it always went. Marcus was the real child. I was just the replacement. The difference in how they treated my memory versus his was stark. Despite me being alive, I never had my own birthday parties growing up. We celebrated Marcus's birthday, though, with his favorite cake and his favorite decorations. I was never allowed to have preferences because Marcus might not have liked them. So I just watched from the sidelines as they celebrated a dead boy's life. My birthdays usually involved a trip to Marcus's grave, maybe a small acknowledgement afterward if I didn't cry too much about wearing his clothes that day. Once when I turned 8, the funeral director gave me a balloon. He let me make a wish before my parents came back from praying at the headstone. I wished for someone to love me for me. I used to try really hard in school thinking maybe if I got different grades than Marcus, my parents would notice me as a separate person. I brought home a science fair award in 2nd grade. I'd spent weeks working on a project about volcanoes, something Marcus had never done. My mom looked at it and said, "That's nice, but Marcus won the art contest in 2nd grade." The certificate ended up in a box with Marcus's real achievements. I stopped trying after a while. Marcus wasn't there to be mean to me, but his ghost was omnipresent. When I felt good, which wasn't often, I'd find ways to be reminded why I existed. My room was actually Marcus's room unchanged since his death. His trophies, his posters, his clothes in the closet. I slept in his bed every night surrounded by his things. I believed for years that I was just borrowing everything until he came back. Sometimes at night I'd stay awake wondering when the real Marcus would return and I'd have to leave. I couldn't have friends over either because our house was a shrine to Marcus. Everything was preserved exactly as he'd left it. My parents were terrified I'd change something. I remember one boy from school, Jake, who wanted to come play. When I asked my mom, she looked horrified and lectured me for an hour about respecting Marcus's memory. By the time I was 9, things got worse. My parents started planning my future to match Marcus's exactly. He'd planned to be a doctor, so I had to be a doctor too. I tried telling my teacher at school that I wanted to be an artist instead. She just smiled and said, "Sometimes we have to follow in our family's footsteps." That's when I realized nobody was going to help me be my own person. I was completely alone in this identity prison. My parents never bothered to ask what I wanted. They'd just announce plans for my life based on what Marcus had wanted when he was my age. The activities Marcus had enjoyed at 7 were the ones I had to do. Piano lessons, soccer practice, math tutoring, everything following his exact schedule from years before. I remember being 10 when they signed me up for advanced mathematics. Marcus had been gifted at math, but numbers made no sense to me, and I struggled terribly. My parents just assumed I was being lazy or not trying hard enough to honor Marcus's memory. They never considered that I might have different abilities. The worst part was the constant comparison. Every report card, every achievement, every failure was measured against what Marcus had done at that age. I wasn't allowed to excel beyond Marcus's accomplishments because that would mean I was better than him. I wasn't allowed to fail because that would dishonor his legacy. The only person who ever treated me like a real person was my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She was elderly and lived next door. She didn't know Marcus personally. Whenever I was outside, she'd ask me about my interests, my dreams, what I wanted to be when I grew up. Normal questions that felt extraordinary to me. She'd give me art supplies and tell me I was talented, creative, and special. When I was 11, she even taught me to paint watercolors in her backyard. One day, my parents caught me painting at Mrs. Chen's house. They were furious. Marcus never painted, they said. This wasn't honoring his memory properly. After that, I wasn't allowed to visit Mrs. Chen anymore. My parents told me she was causing confusion about my identity and needed to mind her own business. I felt more alone than ever. The one person who saw me as myself, not as Marcus's replacement, was gone from my life. The pressure to become Marcus intensified as I got older. By 12, they had me in all his old extracurriculars following his exact high school plan, but I was failing at everything. Piano gave me anxiety. Soccer made me miserable. The advanced math program was destroying my confidence completely. I started keeping a diary hidden under Marcus's mattress, writing letters to myself that I could never share with anyone who might understand. One day when I was 13, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find Mrs. Chen with a woman in a suit who introduced herself as a social worker. My parents went ballistic. My dad tried to physically block them from entering the house. My mom grabbed me and pulled me behind her, screaming at Mrs. Chen. It was chaos. I remember standing there frozen in shock as the adults shouted over each other about my welfare and Marcus's memory. I was taken to another room with the social worker while the adults argued. She asked me questions about my life, my identity, whether I understood who I was supposed to be. I answered honestly, because no one had ever really asked me these things before. I showed her Marcus's room where I slept. I told her about the clothes, the activities, the constant pressure to be someone else. That was the beginning of what turned into a huge investigation. I didn't understand most of it at the time. There were court hearings where I had to talk to a judge. Child psychologists testified about identity disorders and replacement child syndrome. My parents brought in seeing grief counselors who said they were just trying to keep Marcus's memory alive. Mrs. Chen brought in experts who talked about the trauma I was experiencing from being denied my own identity for my entire childhood. The worst part was that during all of this, I was still living at home with my parents. They barely spoke to me except to remind me that Marcus was disappointed. They said if I didn't honor his memory properly, his spirit would never rest. It made me feel guilty, especially since I was struggling with my forced identity. When I was home, I'd hide in the closet for hours just to get away from the pressure. I'd sit there with a flashlight reading books Mrs. Chen had given me, stories about kids who discovered their own talents and interests. I wished so badly that someone would tell me I could be myself instead of a dead person. The court case dragged on for months. My parents fought with everything they had. They truly believed they were right that keeping Marcus alive through me was love. I heard my dad tell the judge we made him to be Marcus. That's his purpose. Like I was a memorial they'd created, not a person with my own soul. I started having nightmares around this time. I dreamed that Marcus's ghost was angry at me for not being good enough at being him. I'd wake up screaming and no one would comfort me. I'd lie there in his bed wearing his pajamas, trying to convince myself that I existed as my own person. School became my only escape. I threw myself into art class, the one place where I could create something that was mine alone. My teacher, Miss Rodriguez, started paying special attention to me. She'd let me stay after school to paint, and she never mentioned Marcus once. As the court case continued, experts testified about something called identity abuse. I didn't fully understand it then, but they were saying forcing me to live as someone else was harmful. They talked about my right to develop my own personality and interests. My parents' lawyer argued that honoring family memory was normal, but the judge asked a question that stuck with me. If Marcus had lived, would you have made him identical to another dead relative? My father couldn't answer. About 6 months into the legal battle, I had my 14th birthday. No one acknowledged it because it wasn't Marcus's birthday. That was still celebrated monthly. The next day, the judge made his final ruling. I was immediately removed from my parents' custody and placed with my Aunt Carol as my temporary guardian. I remember packing Marcus's things while my mother screamed that I was abandoning his memory. My father just sat staring at Marcus's photos like I'd already died too. As I walked out of that house with Aunt Carol, I felt both terrified and relieved. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time, I might be allowed to be myself. Aunt Carol lived in a small apartment about 3 hours away. She had a spare room that she quickly converted into a bedroom for me. The walls were blank. No posters, no trophies, no reminders of anyone else. Just empty space waiting for me to fill it with my own personality. The first night there, I couldn't sleep. I kept waiting for someone to wake me up to tell me I was dishonoring Marcus by sleeping in a bed that wasn't his. When morning came and no one had disturbed me, I actually cried from relief. Aunt Carol found me sobbing and just held me, not asking questions, just being present. That first week was strange. Aunt Carol asked what foods I liked, what clothes I preferred, what I wanted to do each day. Having choices was overwhelming. I kept asking permission for basic things like choosing what to wear or what to watch on TV. Each time Aunt Carol gently reminded me that I could make my own decisions. I'd been with Aunt Carol for about 2 weeks when we got news that my parents were struggling badly. They'd turned Marcus's room into a complete shrine and were having seances. They were trying to contact his spirit to apologize for letting me dishonor his memory. I felt guilty but also validated. The court had been right to remove me. Aunt Carol never pressured me about my identity. She simply told me what was happening in a calm, matter-of-fact way, then asked if I had any questions. When I asked if I was hurting Marcus by wanting to be myself, she sat me down and looked me straight in the eyes. "You are not responsible for keeping another person's memory alive at the expense of your own identity," she said. "Even someone you never met like Marcus." It was the first time anyone had said something like that to me. I burst into tears right there. Aunt Carol just held my hand and let me cry. My parents tried everything to get me back. They filed appeal after appeal. They went on local news talking about how Marcus's memory was being destroyed. They even had a psychic record of video claiming Marcus's spirit was upset that I wasn't honoring him properly. The woman looked fake and rehearsed. I almost caved, but Aunt Carol reminded me that my parents were adults who had put me in an impossible situation by denying me my own identity. The court appointed me a therapist, Dr. Williams. Her office had comfortable chairs where I'd sit while we talked about identity and selfhood. At first, I didn't say much. I was scared that anything I said might be used to force me back into being Marcus. "Everything you tell me stays between us," she assured me. "This is your safe space to discover who you really are." Slowly, I started opening up. I told her about the nightmares, about how I sometimes forgot my own name. I told her about feeling like I didn't exist. With each session, it felt like weights were being lifted off my shoulders. I was finally allowed to explore my own personality and interests. About a month after I moved in with Aunt Carol, we had to go back to court. My parents had filed an emergency petition claiming I was having an identity crisis. They wanted the court to order me back home so they could help me remember who I was supposed to be. I was terrified. The judge asked to speak with me privately. He didn't talk down to me like most adults did. "Do you understand what your parents are asking for?" I nodded and told him I did. I explained that they wanted me to live as Marcus forever, to never develop my own personality or make my own choices. "And how do you feel about that?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't want to be someone else anymore. I want to be me." The judge nodded. Then he asked me something revolutionary. "What do you want for your future? Who do you want to become?" The question caught me off guard. I'd never been allowed to think about my future as separate from Marcus's planned life. After a moment, I told him I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to create beautiful things and maybe help other kids who felt lost like I did. The judge denied my parents' petition. He ruled that forcing me to live as a dead person was psychological abuse. He also made Aunt Carol my permanent guardian and granted a restraining order. My parents couldn't contact me or try to make me be Marcus. When we left the courthouse, there were reporters waiting. My parents gave a tearful interview about how Marcus's memory was being destroyed by the system. Aunt Carol shielded shielded me from the cameras and got me to her car quickly. I ducked down in the back seat, feeling both free and guilty. 2 weeks later, my grandmother called to tell us my parents had been hospitalized. They'd had complete breakdowns and were in psychiatric care. I found out later they'd been found in Marcus's room, dressed in his clothes, talking to his pictures like he was still alive. Even though I felt bad for them, I also felt relief. They couldn't hurt me anymore by trying to erase my identity. The aftermath was difficult. Extended family members sent messages saying I'd destroyed my parents by refusing to honor Marcus properly. Someone created a social media page called Justice for Marcus with my school photo, calling me selfish for wanting my own identity. Aunt Carol reported it and got it taken down, but not before kids at my new school had seen it and started whispering about me. Going to school became challenging. People would ask if I was the kid who wouldn't pretend to be his dead brother. I started having panic attacks. After a particularly bad incident, Aunt Carol decided we needed to move again. She found a job in Oregon and we relocated across the country. She legally changed my name from Marcus Jr. to David, my middle name, to give me a completely fresh start with my own identity. Our new place was a small house with a yard. For the first time, I had my own room that was meant for me, not preserved for someone else. Aunt Carol let me pick out everything. Paint colors, furniture decorations. I chose bright colors and art supplies. It felt like being reborn. Starting at a new school was scary but liberating. No one knew my history. I was just David, the new art kid from across the country. I could finally discover who I really was, except I didn't know how to be normal. I flinched when people used my chosen name at first. I hoarded art supplies in my backpack, afraid someone would take them away. I had no idea how to make friends or have my own opinions. Aunt Carol found me a new therapist, Dr. Kim, who specialized in identity development and psychological abuse recovery. Our sessions were different. Instead of just talking, we did art therapy. I painted my feelings, drew my dreams, and slowly discovered my own creative voice. I made a self-portrait marking all the ways I was different from Marcus. My hair was darker. My eyes were green, not blue. I was left-handed. "What do you notice about this painting?" Dr. Kim asked me. "I exist," I said quietly. "I'm a real person, not just a copy." She smiled. "I see a unique individual with his own talents, dreams, and identity. You've always existed, David. Now you're just allowed to show it." I didn't feel real yet. I felt confused. I struggled to trust my own preferences. I jumped when people called me by my chosen name. Dr. Kim taught me grounding techniques, looking in mirrors and saying my real name, making choices about small things like what to eat. Some days these exercises helped. Other days nothing worked to convince me that I was allowed to exist as myself. About 6 months after we moved, I had a major breakthrough. Dr. Kim had me write a letter to Marcus, the brother I'd never known. I wrote, "Dear Marcus, I'm sorry our parents couldn't let you rest in peace. I'm sorry they tried to make me into you instead of letting me be myself. You deserve to be remembered for who you were. I deserve to live as who I am. We're both real people, not interchangeable parts." I sobbed writing that letter. All the grief for my stolen childhood came pouring out. Dr. Kim had to end our session early while I processed the emotions. The next day, something had shifted. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally acknowledged that both Marcus and I deserved to exist as separate people. I started standing straighter. I raised my hand in art class. I even smiled at a girl named Maya who sat next to me at lunch. Maya became my first real friend. She didn't care that I was awkward and had weird gaps in my social development. She just liked that I was creative and would help her with art projects. We started eating lunch together, then hanging out after school. Her family was warm and chaotic. 3 sisters, noisy dinners, parents who encouraged everyone to be themselves. They welcomed me completely. The first time Maya invited me for a sleepover, I panicked. I'd never stayed anywhere but Marcus's preserved bedroom before moving with Aunt Carol. The idea of sleeping in someone else's home was terrifying. What if I forgot who I was supposed to be? What if I reverted to being Marcus? I almost canceled, but Aunt Carol encouraged me to try. "You can always call me," she promised, "but I think this will help you see how normal kids live." So I went. Maya's mom made tacos and let us put whatever toppings we wanted. Her dad taught us card tricks. Her sisters included me in their games. It was loud and messy and wonderful. That night I did have a nightmare. I woke up convinced I was back in Marcus's room, but instead of being alone, Maya was there. She didn't make a big deal, just asked if I wanted water and started telling me about art school. I started making other friends too. There was Alex from my history class who loved photography, and Sam who played guitar. Slowly I was building an identity that had nothing to do with being a replacement or a memorial. I was just David, a regular teenager with friends. Aunt Carol supported me every step of the way. She came to my art shows, helped with projects, and celebrated my real achievements. When I got an A on a painting she'd never seen before, she put it on the refrigerator. She took pictures of my artwork, creating the portfolio I'd never had. She introduced me as her nephew, not as Marcus's replacement. Each time she did, I felt more secure in my own identity. When I turned 15, Aunt Carol threw me my first real birthday party. She invited my new friends, decorated with my favorite colors, and bought art supplies. She even hired a photographer to document the day. I felt awkward being celebrated for existing, but also deeply happy. That night after everyone left, Aunt Carol gave me a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with my chosen name, David. "To remind you that you're real," she said, helping me put it on. "You exist as yourself, not as anyone else's memory or replacement." I wore that bracelet every day. I still do. Unfortunately, the legal battles didn't completely end. My parents tried to appeal the custody ruling multiple times. They tried to argue that I was too young to choose my own identity. They attempted to have the restraining order lifted by claiming they'd recovered. None of it worked, but each new filing meant more court appearances, more anxiety, more reminders of the identity prison I'd escaped. About a year after we moved to Oregon, the harassment finally stopped. I found out later that my parents had been permanently hospitalized. They'd never recovered from losing both Marcus and their replacement version of him. They'd completely lost touch with reality. Life settled into a new normal. I joined the art club at school and discovered discovered I had real talent for painting and sculpture. I started thinking about art school someday, maybe becoming an art therapist to help other kids who'd lost themselves. I even went on my first date with a girl named Emma from my ceramics class. It was awkward, but felt like such a normal teenage experience. But the trauma didn't just disappear. I still had triggers. Seeing Marcus's name anywhere sent me into panic attacks. Cemeteries made me nauseous. Certain family movies about deceased relatives were completely unwatchable for me. I had this persistent fear that someone would force me to be Marcus again. When I was 16, that fear almost came true. I was at school when the office called me down. There was a man waiting who claimed to be my uncle. He said my parents had recovered and wanted to see me, that they'd learned to accept my identity and just wanted their son back. I started hyperventilating right there in the school office. The secretary had to call Aunt Carol to come get me immediately. It turned out the man was a private investigator my extended family had hired. They wanted to kidnap me and force me back into being Marcus. Aunt Carol immediately filed for enhanced protection, which was granted. We also learned that my cousins had been planning to take me to Marcus's grave. They believed if I visited his burial site, I'd remember my true purpose and voluntarily return to being his replacement. That incident set me back months in therapy. I started having nightmares again, started checking locks and windows obsessively. I became convinced that my relatives would kidnap me and lock me in Marcus's preserved bedroom until I agreed to be him again. Dr. Kim helped me work through the fear, but it never fully went away. To help me feel safer, Aunt Carol enrolled me in a self-defense class. The instructor was a former counselor who specialized in helping trauma survivors. She taught me not just physical defense, but mental resilience. You have the right to exist as yourself, she'd tell me. No one can take your identity away from you again. You're stronger than you know. By 17, I was doing much better. I had close friends, good grades, and a clear vision for my future in art. I still saw Dr. Kim, but we'd reduced sessions to monthly check-ins. I still had difficult days, but they became less frequent. Aunt Carol and I developed traditions of our own. Saturday morning art sessions, movie nights, weekly trips to galleries and museums. We took photos at art installations and painted landscapes together. We built the kind of memories I'd never had growing up. When I was 18, I got my driver's license. Aunt Carol surprised me with a used Subaru painted with rainbow stripes that I'd chosen myself. The freedom of being able to go places on my own was incredible. Sometimes I'd drive to art supply stores just to buy materials with my own money. That same year, I started applying to art schools. Aunt Carol took me on campus tours, walking through studios and imagining my future as an artist. I applied to 6 schools and got accepted to 4, including my top choice, a prestigious art institute in California with excellent therapy programs. When the acceptance letter came, Aunt Carol and I danced around the kitchen like maniacs. She'd been saving for my education since getting custody. I always knew you were meant to be an artist, she told me. I'm so proud of you, David. Proud of who you've become. High school graduation was emotional. Aunt Carol invited everyone. Maya's family, my other friends, Dr. Kim, even Mrs. Chen, who'd started the investigation. She ordered a huge cake decorated with paintbrushes and had photos printed of all my artwork over the years. During the ceremony, when they called my name, David Chen, I felt a surge of pride. I'd made it, despite everything I'd found myself. As I walked across the stage, I touched my name bracelet. Real. I was real. That summer before art school was transformative. I worked at a local gallery, learned framing techniques, and prepared my portfolio. Aunt Carol and I took a road trip to art museums across the country. Looking at masterpieces created by people expressing their own unique visions, I felt inspired. I belonged in the world of authentic creative expression. Moving to art school was exciting but scary. Aunt Carol helped me set up my dorm room, making sure I had photos and familiar items. Saying goodbye was hard. She'd been my savior, my protector, my real parent in every way that mattered. I'm just a phone call away, she reminded me, hugging me tight. And I'll visit for Parents' Weekend. I love you, I told her. I love you too, kiddo. More than you'll ever know. Art school was a revelation. No one there knew my history unless I chose to share it. I was just David, freshman art student. I decorated my side of the room with my paintings and photos of my real life with Aunt Carol. My roommate Jake was a sculpture major from Denver, with an infectious laugh and an impressive collection of vintage band t-shirts. I threw myself into classes, figure drawing, painting theory, art history. I joined critique groups and raised my hand in discussions. I signed up for art therapy courses and a peer counseling program. I made new friends, went to parties, and started building my adult identity. There were still challenges. Sometimes I'd panic when people asked about my family or childhood. The gaps in my social development showed. I also struggled with creative confidence. After years of being told I couldn't have my own interests, expressing myself artistically felt forbidden. I started seeing a therapist at the campus counseling center who specialized in identity development and artistic expression. During my sophomore year, I took a psychology class that changed everything. We discussed identity formation, childhood trauma, and family dynamics. One day, the professor brought up replacement child syndrome. I nearly walked out, but stayed listening to classmates discuss the psychological damage. After class, I went to the professor's office. Dr. Martinez was a thoughtful woman with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers from her own art practice. With shaking hands, I told her my story. The real reason I was so interested in identity psychology and art therapy. David, she said when I finished, have you ever considered sharing your experience publicly? Your perspective could help other replacement children. I hadn't considered it. My instinct was to hide my past to try to outrun the trauma, but Dr. Martinez suggested I could help change things. With her encouragement, I wrote a paper about my experience. I changed some details, but the core story was mine. Dr. Martinez helped me submit it to a psychology journal. To my shock, they published it. The response was overwhelming. I received emails from psychologists, social workers, and other replacement children who had similar experiences. A children's rights organization asked if I would speak at their conference. For the first time, I saw how my painful past might have purpose. I was 20 when I gave my my first public speech. It was at a trauma recovery conference in Seattle. Aunt Carol flew in to support me, sitting in the front row as I shared my story with professionals who work with identity abuse cases. My voice shook at first, but grew stronger. I talked about the psychological damage of forced identity replacement and the importance of authentic self-development. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. During the Q&A, a therapist apologized for not recognizing replacement child syndrome in her own practice. That conference led to more speaking opportunities and advocacy work. I changed my major to art therapy with a focus on identity development. I wanted to help kids discover their authentic selves through creative expression. College flew by. Before I knew it, I was graduating with honors. Aunt Carol cheered loudest when I walked across the stage. She'd been there for every milestone supporting my journey to selfhood. After graduation, I took a job at a children's art therapy center. I traveled speaking at conferences about replacement child syndrome. I helped develop treatment protocols for kids struggling with imposed identities. I even testified before a legislature about children's rights to selfhood. Through it all, Aunt Carol remained my anchor. She'd moved closer to my job, and we maintained our weekly art sessions. She'd started dating a kind art teacher named Robert, and seeing her happy with someone who appreciated her creativity brought me joy. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. My identity issues made relationships challenging, but I was learning to trust people with my real self. After art school, I joined a nonprofit that provided art therapy to at-risk children. The work was demanding, but deeply meaningful. I was using my degree and my experience to help kids discover their authentic identities through creative expression. Last month, a letter arrived. It was from a distant cousin I barely remembered. Seeing the familiar handwriting triggered my old fears. I'd been carrying it around for days, unable to open it, but unable to throw it away either. Aunt Carol offered to read it first, but I needed to face whatever was inside myself. I needed to prove I was strong enough. So I sat at my kitchen table and finally opened the letter. My hands were shaking, but I reminded myself I wasn't that lost child anymore. The letter was from my cousin Sarah. She wrote, "David, I hope this finds you well. I wanted you to know that your parents passed away last month. They never recovered from the psychiatric breakdown. They spent their final years in care believing Marcus was still alive, and you were just visiting. I thought you should know that in their minds they never stopped loving Marcus. But I also think they never learned to love you. I'm sorry for how our family treated you. I was young, but I should have spoken up. You deserved better. There's something else. We found boxes of your artwork in their basement. Paintings you made as a child hidden away because they weren't Marcus enough. I'd like to return them to you if you want them. You were always artistic even when they tried to suppress it. I hope you found peace and become who you were meant to be." I read the letter 3 times, processing the mix of relief and sadness. My parents were gone. The people who tried to erase my identity could never hurt me again, but they died never seeing me as real. I called Aunt Carol and told her about the letter. She listened without judgment, then asked how I felt. Sad but free, I admitted. They can't hurt any more replacement children now. A week later, a package arrived with my childhood artwork. Dozens of paintings and drawings I'd made in secret. Self-portraits that looked nothing like Marcus. Landscapes that showed my real artistic vision. Looking at them, I could see my authentic self trying to emerge even as a child. The real David had always existed underneath the imposed identity. I decided to create an exhibition using both my childhood work and current pieces. I called it Becoming Real, a celebration of authentic identity. The show opened last month to incredible response. Other replacement children attended, sharing their own stories of identity recovery. Maya came to support me, bringing her whole family. Mrs. Chen attended too, now in her 80s, but still encouraging young artists. During my opening speech, I thanked everyone who'd helped me discover my real self. Aunt Carol, Dr. Kim, Mrs. Chen, and all my chosen family. I ended by saying, "We all deserve to exist as ourselves, not as monuments to other people's expectations. Our identities belong to us alone." After the exhibition closed, I felt a sense of completion. I'd transformed my trauma into art and advocacy that could help others. I'm 25 now, working as an art therapist and speaking regularly about identity development. I've even started dating someone special. Her name is Claire, and she's a trauma counselor who understands my history without being intimidated by it. She loves my art and supports my advocacy work. We're taking things slowly, but I'm learning to trust someone with my authentic self, to believe that I'm worthy of love as David, not as anyone else. Sometimes I think about Marcus, the brother I never knew. I hope his spirit is at peace, knowing his memory is honored appropriately now. And I think about the child I was forced to pretend to be for so many years. That fake version of Marcus can finally rest too. I am David. I create art that comes from my own soul. I help children discover their authentic selves. I choose my own clothes and friends and future. My identity belongs to me. My body is my own. My life is my own. And that's exactly how it should be.